Hi everyone. In this section, we'll talk the B2B buying process, including buying centers, the decision process, and different roles. So first of all, the buying center is the decision-making unit of a buying organization that's made up of all individuals involved in that decision process. So decision-making is heavily determined by how organizations are built. Having multiple people, even an organization of two, after all, requires coordination. Therefore, organizations formalize their buying process compared with most final consumers who usually only have themselves to ask and maybe a family member. And keep in mind, whenever we say an organization, it can be very small or large, from that single entrepreneur to a huge global firm. For now, we're stressing the extremes of giant formalized organizations compared with the individual consumer just purchasing for personal use. So what we see is that a buying center usually has shared goals, risk, and knowledge, maybe made up of from 2 to several people, and that members of buying centers may change from purchase to purchase. So some organizations have an official dedicated committee, others just as the purpose arises. Effectively, you're marketing to each buying center member. Each member likely may draw from different sources of information and is likely tasked with different concerns for the purchase. So, for example, when buying software for an accounting firm, the executives might prioritize software security, technicians want software to be flexible with other systems, and the accountants want software reliability. And after reading this, you might recognize that a buying center sounds a lot like a job hiring process. In essence, that's what you do when you're on the labor market. You are marketing your services to a buying center. So, in sum, buying centers are made up of many different people, and each person matters for your marketing mix. Now, there are 5 primary roles that a person might take as part of a buying center. They again will seem familiar because they're a lot like the ones from your chapter on final consumers for how families and groups make decisions. So, first we have users, the people who will actually use the product. They may be production workers or support staff. Deciders, the people in the organization who have the power to select the criteria or approve a supplier or decision. Some people split the decider from approvers, by the way. Influencers, people whose expertise is used to help determine which products are needed. Influencers are often tech people who help write specifications, and remember, when we mean tech people, it's very relative to what that means. Gatekeepers, people in key positions in the organization who control the flow of information. Gatekeepers can include receptionists, secretaries, researchers, and others. For example, a person compiling a list of vendors may have heard bad things about a vendor from a friend and strikes them off the list before anyone else hears about them. Buyers, the purchasing managers who are responsible for working with suppliers and arranging the terms of sale. And keep in mind, a person can take multiple roles, and more than one person might be tasked with any particular role. So, as a quick quiz, marketers need to understand their firm's buying centers. A series of questions can be used to facilitate this process. Which of the following questions would be the least useful when trying to understand the operations of a buying center? So, A, which individuals are in the buying center for the product or service? B, what is the relative influence of each member of the group? C, what are the buying criteria of each member? D, how does each member of the group perceive our company, products, or salespeople? E, what criteria were used to select the members of the buying center? So go ahead. What do you think? So the best answer is E. Remember, the question is asking you to observe the buying center so that you can figure out the operations. That is how the buying center actually will work. So presumably you can adjust your appeal. The first 4 questions, or rather, they are questions, each address different ways the buying center may make a decision, such as who is involved, their relative influence on the process, what they actually value, and of course, how they think you, the seller, fits in. While the last one can help to understand a bit more about the organizational culture that led to this buying center, it won't actually be as useful as the other questions for telling us how we're actually to approach this buying center and its members. For example, you can imagine that the criteria to select members may be very random. Perhaps they just drew straws, but the way they actually function as a unit may be very logic and value oriented. So, like individual consumers, organizational buyers are ultimately problem solvers. There are 3 kinds of buying processes based on how much of a new solution they need. So, if you just need to reorder the same part, you don't need much problem solving. Has something changed, such as the vendor changing their specs or their new regulations? Then an organization may turn to more extensive decision making. These should look familiar because they map onto the 3 types of problem solving we saw final consumers do based on involvement. So at the bottom here, straight rebuy. It's a routine purchase that uses existing suppliers to fulfill a standard order. They already know what they want and who's out there. They don't need to seek out new information. Straight rebuys often use e-commerce order systems where you just directly input your order. They're often automated these days. So this is that routinized response behavior from the last chapter. A modified rebuy is in between, where there's some review to the buying process. Usually it involves a small change to the problem definition, and some members of the buyer firm are involved. Again, similar to limited problem solving. Then there's the new buy, sometimes called new task buying. This is when a customer organization has a new need and needs a great deal of information. It often involves setting product specifications, evaluating sources of supply, and establishing a new order routine to follow in the future. Notice that this establishes procedures for later purchasing. Very important. So, this is comparable to that extensive problem solving from your last chapter. So, quick question. If you are already the approved seller for an organization, which of these 3 buying processes would present the easiest opportunity to make a sale? And why? Which buying process will present greatest challenges and why? So, what did you think? If you're the approved supplier, straight rebuys are the easiest. You have an established relationship and you're their go-to person. There's a routine. If you're on the effectively here, if you're not on the approved vendor or the go-to supplier, then straight rebuys are the hardest because that organizational buyer is not looking for anything new. As you can imagine, cold calling sales attempts are the hardest where there's no prior relationship, as opposed to, say, a warm calling attempt where there is a prior relationship with the organization or a related body, that parent company. Meanwhile, new buying remains difficult even if you are known to the company because you need to contact and appeal to potentially different people for the buying center. So in sum, buying processes range from simple to complex for organizations just as they do for consumers. The amount of time, effort, and people involved can vary. And here's a handy chart from your book for your reference. Also, tons of great data out there on organizational customers. You just have to find it. So this one is about what information sources were liked for organizational customers, and more charts on considered trustworthy and what types of organizational claims tend to provoke doubt. So now the organizational decision-making process should look familiar, I hope. we can see our primary drivers of the decision process are, of course, the organization's needs and the way they make their decisions. So a major point I want to make is that the decision process may be more formalized and it may be made by one person or a massive buying center. That being said, decisions come down to being made by people. Buyers, of course, focus on companies for innovation, survival, growth, and profit as a part of their jobs. However, they're still people. There's emotions, cognitive biases, they have their own careers and personal interests, and this applies to even to the largest organization with the most formal procedures. But think of it this way. Can functional benefits have other perks? Yes. There are benefits to making it easy for organizations to justify their decision to the rest of the organization. So here's an example. Cinnamon Roasted sells corporate gifts in the form of cinnamon roasted nuts in nice customized tins and other packaging. Cinnamon Roasted's organizational customers purchase these as gifts for their own customers. So this is relationship marketing at work. Their customers want certainty. And so Cinnamon Roasted therefore incorporated more customer testimonials in their promotional materials, so their catalogs. So reports of timely delivery, great customer service, and delight the givers heard from their recipients then point to that one big idea. Your money was well spent. You don't need to worry. Your end objective for great relationship marketing will be achieved. These testimonials pull double duty by first encouraging those organizational buyers during the evaluation and selection stages of the security of their purchase, and of course reaffirming the wisdom of their choice during post-purchase evaluation. And again, these should sound familiar because they were examples of cognitive dissonance and motivations from our past chapter on final consumers. So in sum, a seller's marketing mix should satisfy both the needs of the organizational buyer and the needs of individuals who influence the purchase within and beyond that organization. The seller must consider each part of the decision making and each of the people involved every step of the way. So if you like, here is an example comparing consumers and organizations for those decision process. And then as usual, an optional video if you want to learn more. You can find out when the how-to, company culture, or tease type videos are more likely to be useful to nudge along customers along that customer decision process. And something you might notice is how many position you, that customer, as the hero in your journey and how they will faithfully help you along.